At 92, Michael Caine should be a finished story, framed in tributes, boxed into legacy, and quietly filed away while the world rehearses his goodbye. Instead, he's living inside a strange modern ritual, death hoaxes that trend online like monthly weather reports, each one a little more believable than the last. In a transcript, you can feel what that does to a person. It's not just insulting, it's invasive. It turns a living man into a rumor, then asks him to watch. Caine's retirement wasn't announced with fireworks. It arrived with pain, as Caine stopped being a prop and became survival. Spinal stenosis narrowed his world into careful steps and measured distances. Even the simplest movement carried a calculation. Can my body endure the day? When he said he was bloody 90 and couldn't walk properly, it wasn't a dramatic line for the press. It was a practical truth delivered with that blunt British clarity that somehow makes bad news feel even colder. And yet, what follows retirement isn't peace. It's suffocation. The phone that had rung for decades goes quiet. Not because he stopped matching, but because studios and insurers started hearing a different word when they heard his name: liability. Clauses appear. Medical exams stretch for hours. People whisper about risk with polite smiles. The industry mourns quietly, fans accept reluctantly, and the legend retreats into a smaller life. Writing memoirs, tending a garden, watching old films where his younger body moves without negotiating with pain. But the transcript makes one thing painfully clear. For a man who has worked since he was 14, rest doesn't feel like reward. It feels like erasure. He reaches for scripts that aren't there. He catches himself rehearsing lines for films that will never be made. He studies his reflection as if preparing for a role that has already been permanently recast. Retirement doesn't just remove work. It removes structure, identity, and the sense of being needed. That's where Shakira enters the frame, not as a side character, but as the steady force holding the story together. She's seen him at his worst, pulled him back from self-destruction decades earlier, and watched him endure the losses that come with a long life. In 50 years, she's seen him cry only 3 times, the transcript says, moments so rare they land like milestones. Now she watches a different kind of suffering, not grief, not scandal, not addiction, but the particular torture of a performer without a stage. Her method isn't melodrama. It's ritual. Breakfast the way his mother used to make. Sinatra on the record player. Dancing alone in the living room until he can't help but smile. And when pain keeps him awake, she gives him the line that sounds simple but hits like a strategy. You're still a lion. Because soon, very soon, the phone will ring again. Not with a gentle farewell cameo, but with something that demands more than his failing body should be able to give. And the real question isn't whether he can do it. It's what could possibly be powerful enough to make him try. Michael Caine's goodbye, as the transcript tells it, wasn't staged like a victory lap. It was delivered like a diagnosis. At 90, he said he couldn't walk properly, and the sentence lands with an almost brutal simplicity. The problem isn't talent, it's physics. When spinal stenosis turns your backbone into narrowing channels, your body stops being an instrument and becomes an obstacle. Every step is pain. Every movement is negotiation. And for an actor, especially one who has lived inside schedules, scripts, and sets for nearly his entire life, that negotiation doesn't just happen in the spine. It happens in the psyche. The transcript frames retirement as a kind of slow suffocation. The industry changes its tone first. The phone that rang for 7 decades stops ringing, not because the world stopped admiring him, but because the world started doing math. Insurance clauses multiply. Liability becomes a whispered word that contaminates every conversation. Studios that once begged for his time now hesitate, politely, and that politeness is its own cruelty. It's not rejection in the old sense, when you could fight back with another audition, another role, another shot. It's rejection based on something you can't outwork. And this is where the transcript nails the core tragedy. For a man who started working at 14 and filmed over 160 movies, retirement doesn't feel like rest. It feels like being erased while still alive. He tries to embrace the quiet life, to tell himself it's deserved and natural. He writes in his study. He tends the garden. He watches old films where a younger version of himself stands without searching for the nearest chair, fights without wincing, moves without calculating the distance. But the quiet doesn't soothe him. It exposes him. Some mornings, the transcript says, he reaches for scripts that aren't there. He catches himself rehearsing lines for movies that will never be made. He studies his reflection as if preparing for a role that's already been permanently recast. Those details matter because they show the habit of identity. If your entire life has been structured by what are we shooting next, the absence of that question can feel like a void. Then the transcript shifts to the person who understands this danger better than anyone, his wife, Shakira. She's portrayed not as a fan of his legend, but as a witness to the man behind it. She has pulled him back from self-destruction before, back when vodka was swallowing his days and the parties never ended because ending them meant facing silence. She has held him through the deaths of friends, through scandals and triumphs, through decades where the public saw a polished gentleman while she saw the raw human underneath. What's striking is the transcript's emphasis on how rarely he shows emotion. 3 times in 50 years, it says. Once at his mother's death, once holding their first grandchild, and once when his body first betrayed him and he couldn't get up the stairs without help. The point isn't to mythologize him as stoic. The point is to highlight what kind of suffering this current moment is, because it makes him dissolve in a way that doesn't look like crying. It looks like fading. Shakira recognizes that. She sees the particular torture of a performer without a stage, a storyteller with no more stories, a man who defined himself by action suddenly rendered immobile. And she fights it the way she has always fought, quietly, strategically, with rituals that rebuild purpose when purpose is leaking out of the walls. She makes his favorite breakfast, the one his mother used to make with leftover bread and drippings, small comfort with a big shadow behind it. She puts on Sinatra and dances alone in the living room until he can't help but smile. She whispers, "You're still a lion," when pain keeps him awake, when the cane feels heavier than it should, when he stares at a phone that refuses to ring. But the transcript is careful. It doesn't present her love as blind encouragement. It frames her love as awareness. She knows what retirement is doing to him. She knows that the body is failing and cannot be argued with. She also knows that for Michael Caine, the deeper danger isn't death. It's becoming past tense while his heart still beats. That's why the story makes such a big deal about the coming phone call. Because it isn't just work returning. It's identity returning. And the transcript insists this return won't be gentle. Not a cameo. Not a comfortable voice role. Not a sentimental final bow designed to ease him into obscurity. It will demand everything his failing body can no longer give, forcing a question that cuts through all the romance. What could possibly be strong enough to drag a legend back from the edge of goodbye? In the transcript's logic, the answer isn't money and it isn't fame. Those are solved problems. The answer is the terror of emptiness, the need for purpose, and the stubborn refusal to let time write your last scene before you're ready. The world may be practicing its farewell, but Michael Caine, propped up by painkillers, routines, and one woman's unwavering belief, still has a reason to answer when opportunity calls. The transcript pivots from a visible problem, aging, pain, retirement, into something far more intimate. The secret that shaped Michael Caine's understanding of love long before Hollywood ever did. And it begins the way life-changing truths often begin, not with a dramatic confession, but with a single phone call that feels slightly off from start. In 1992, a newspaper reporter calls and asks a question Caine never expected to hear. "Did you know about your half-brother, David?" The words hang there, the transcript says, like smoke from a bomb that has just detonated. Because it isn't merely new information. It is an accusation against memory itself. Michael Caine, who believed he understood every hard edge of his working-class childhood, suddenly realizes there was an entire corridor of family history he had never even seen a door for. The transcript then carefully reconstructs how the secret survived for 50 years. Not through complicated lies, but through routine, Routine, so consistent it became invisible. Every week, rain or shine, war or peace, his mother, Ellen, would announce she was going shopping. She put on her best coat, grabbed her worn purse, and disappeared for hours. The family never questioned it, never followed, never wondered why she returned without packages. In many households shaped by poverty and war, you learn early that survival requires selective curiosity. You don't interrogate everything because you don't have the energy. You accept what keeps the day moving. But Ellen wasn't shopping. She was visiting her firstborn son, David, who had been born with severe epilepsy and mental disabilities and had been placed in Cane Hill Hospital when he was 2 years old. The transcript lingers on that detail because it carries a historical cruelty. There were eras when families were pressured, sometimes explicitly, sometimes through shame and lack of support, to institutionalize disabled children and then erase them socially. Move on, society implied. Start again. Public life did not make space for children like David, and private life was often warped by that pressure. Ellen's response, as described here, was not a public rebellion. It was a private vow. For 50 years, she kept going. Week after week, she made the journey alone. She carried the weight alone. She visited her child without complaint, without explanation, and without asking for comfort in return. The transcript frames this as a kind of love that is both heroic and heartbreaking, devotion with no audience, duty without recognition, grief converted into a schedule. When Michael finally confronts her, gently, carefully, as if approaching a wound that is never healed, she doesn't offer a dramatic justification. She offers a sentence that rewrites the emotional logic of his entire life. I didn't want you to feel different. I didn't want you to carry what I carried. That line matters because it reveals what the secret truly was. It wasn't simply a hidden son. It was a model of love as protection through silence. Love as absorbing pain, so your other child can grow without its shadow. The transcript says the revelation shattered Michael Caine in a way poverty never could, in a way the war never managed, in a way failure and rejection never achieved. That comparison is significant. Poverty is a visible enemy. You can point to it. War is a historic enemy. You can name it. Career setbacks are professional enemies. You can compete. But a mother's decades-long private grief, hidden right beside you, breaks something else. The certainty that you truly know the people you love most. There's also guilt embedded in that shattering. Guilt the transcript doesn't sensationalize, but makes unavoidable. If your mother carried this alone for 50 years, what does that say about the life you lived beside her? About the conversations you never had? About the questions you never thought to ask? And what does it mean to love someone who protected you by withholding a truth that might have made you different while paying the cost herself? Then comes the second blow. David dies before Michael can properly know him. In a typical Hollywood narrative, the secret would lead to a reunion, a cathartic reconciliation, a chance to make it right. The transcript gives no such comfort. The half-brother becomes another ghost in a life already familiar with ghosts. The knowledge arrives too late to be turned into relationship. It becomes grief without the relief of shared time. Yet the transcript insists the revelation doesn't merely wound him, it explains him. After discovering David, Michael sees his mother differently. The woman who had rescued him from wartime abuse, scraped and saved to keep food on the table, and embodied strength and truth in his mind, had also been living a double life. Not a scandalous one, a sorrowful one. A life divided between what her family needed to survive and what her heart needed to remain loyal to a child the world told her to forget. That's why the transcript's framing is so powerful. It suggests Michael's entire career becomes legible through Ellen. Every time he played a fierce protector. Every time he embodied a character carrying secret pain. Every time he expressed quiet strength rather than loud heroism. Those weren't just acting choices. They were inheritance. He had been channeling his mother all along, performing the emotional posture she lived. Hold the breaking heart inside. Keep the face steady. Keep moving. This reframing matters for the present-day storyline because it turns the comeback into more than a stunt. If Ellen taught him that love can be measured in endurance, showing up week after week, no applause, then retirement becomes psychologically unbearable. Not because he craves fame, but because stopping feels like betrayal of the ethic that built him. His mother didn't stop visiting. She didn't stop loving. She didn't stop showing up, even when it cost her. The transcript implies that ethic is now lodged inside him like a second spine. If you can still move, you still show up. And that idea becomes even more poignant when you connect it to his current condition. Spinal stenosis has narrowed his physical channels, but Ellen's example has carved a wider channel of meaning. He may be slower, in pain, dependent on supports that would have once embarrassed him, but he is still in motion, still showing up, still insisting on being present tense in a world that keeps trying to turn him into a memorial. In that sense, The Secret is not merely a dramatic twist. It is the story's moral engine. It explains why he cannot truly retire, why he feels erased without a script, and why even at 92, when logic says be content, be still, accept the sunset, something in him rebels. He has lived his entire life in the shadow of a woman who proved that love sometimes means carrying the unbearable quietly and continuing anyway. So when the transcript later asks what force could drag a legend back from the edge of goodbye, Part 3 offers a clear answer. The force is not Hollywood. The force is a lifetime shaped by endurance, by loyalty, and by the kind of love that keeps going even when the world would understand if you stopped. By the time the transcript reaches Shakira, it is no longer telling a celebrity biography. It is building a case for why Michael Caine's life has always been a battle between motion and collapse, between the need to keep going and the temptation to disappear. And Shakira enters that battle not as a footnote, but as the turning point that rewired everything. The transcript frames Caine's darkest period with a bluntness that leaves little room for romance. By 1970, he was not simply enjoying fame. He was drowning in it. Success didn't heal the old damage. It amplified it. The parties never ended because ending them meant facing the silence. And in that silence lived the ghosts he'd been outrunning since childhood. War, poverty, loss, the constant pressure to perform confidence even when the inside of you is still a frightened boy. Alcohol became the bridge over the silence. 2 bottles of vodka a day wasn't a quirky anecdote. It was a method of survival that was quietly turning into a method of self-erasure. That's why the transcript's next scene matters so much. It isn't a glamorous meeting at a film premiere or a neat romantic cliché engineered for audiences. It is almost absurd in its ordinariness. Caine alone in his flat, half drunk already, television flickering against walls that have heard too many lonely nights. A coffee commercial comes on, something he would normally ignore, yet something makes him look up. A woman appears on screen holding a cup with a calm grace that the transcript describes like salvation. Her smile isn't performed. It's real, warm, and knowing, as if it could see through the screen to the broken man watching. And then he says the line that changes the trajectory of his life. I'm going to marry that woman. In the transcript's logic, this isn't a drunken fantasy. It is the first clear decision he has made in a long time. A rare moment of certainty that cuts through the fog. What he is really saying is, I want a life that isn't built around running away from myself. Finding her, Shakira Bakshi, as named in the transcript, should have been impossible. But impossible is the territory Caine has always lived in. He tracked her down. He gets her number. He calls. And she says no. He calls again. No again. And again. 12 rejections. That detail is not there for comedy. It's there to establish something important. He couldn't buy this with fame. He couldn't shortcut it with status. If Shakira said yes, it would have to be because she heard something beyond the celebrity packaging. On the 13th call, she says yes. The transcript then gives Caine a line that functions like a confession disguised as a joke. It took her 8 minutes, he says, to fall in love with him. Or maybe 2 hours. But he knew in 8 minutes he'd found his reason to stop dying. That phrasing matters. He doesn't describe her as a trophy or an accessory to his success. He describes her as a reason to be present, a reason to want clarity, a reason to want tomorrow. What makes this section powerful is the way it avoids the "she saved him by controlling him" stereotype. The transcript insists Shakira didn't use ultimatums or theatrical interventions. She didn't shame him into sobriety. She saved him by seeing him. She looked past the performance to the frightened core, past the movie star to the boy still shaped by bombs and hunger and absence. She made him want to be better without ever declaring him not enough. So the vodka disappears not because she demanded it, but because he wanted to remember his life with her clearly. The party's in not because she complained, but because being home with her becomes more satisfying than any room full of strangers chanting his name. The transcript frames this as a quiet miracle. Love not as fireworks, but as a new gravity that pulls you out of orbit around your worst habits. This is why, decades later, Shakira's role in the comeback story is so critical. She isn't simply the supportive spouse cheering from the sidelines. She is the person who understands, in granular detail, what happens to Michael Caine when he loses purpose. She has already watched him nearly die once, not from illness, but from emptiness disguised as celebration. She knows his danger signs. She knows that the body's decline is real, but she also knows the psychological decline can be faster if the days stop having meaning. And then the transcript drops the kind of twist designed to make the audience lean forward. The call that shatters retirement comes from the last person anyone expects, Vin Diesel. Not a prestigious director offering a dignified swan song. Not an art house script built around stillness and reflection. An action star. A blockbuster engine. A man who, in this story, isn't calling with a casual invitation, but with urgency, "I need you, not I want you." The transcript names the project as The Last Witch Hunter 2, a sequel in a genre Caine is not typically associated with, and one that carries physical demands his body may no longer be able to meet. That mismatch is intentional. It creates the central conflict. Every logical bone in his frame should say no. His agents say no. Doctors advise no. Even Shakira, his lifelong defender, gently suggests maybe this isn't the one. The transcript does not present her as naive optimism. It presents her as a realist who has spent decades protecting the man she loves from the cost of his own instincts. So why does he consider it? The transcript's answer is not money. It explicitly frames him as financially secure, comfortable, not chasing another paycheck. The answer is not glory either. 2 Oscars, major honors, and cultural immortality have already locked his reputation into history. And it's not even simple pride, because the transcript makes him honest about uncertainty. He doesn't know if he can still do it. The answer the transcript keeps circling is purpose. The terror of becoming past tense while your heart still beats in present. The fear that the real death isn't the moment your heart stops, but the moment you stop having a reason for it to beat. That's where the preparation details start to feel like warfare rather than filmmaking. Earlier mornings not for makeup, but for medication timing. Physical therapy aimed not at youth, but at functional performance. Coaching on how to fake strength, how to position the body so the camera won't catch tremors, how to lean without looking like leaning. On-set medical teams. Insurance that requires an avalanche of signatures. The transcript frames it as negotiation, not fighting age, but bargaining with it. And still, at the center of all this logistics, there is a simple human truth. When the camera rolls, something in him wakes up. The craft becomes oxygen. The stage returns. The storyteller gets a story again. In the transcript's world, that is what Shakira has been preserving all these years. Not just his body, but his reason. Michael Caine's comeback, as the transcript frames it, is not a publicity stunt. It's a referendum on what being alive means when the world has already started filing you under was. The public sees the headline, 92-year-old legend returns to Hollywood, and immediately reaches for easy narratives. Ego, money, one last victory lap. But the transcript keeps dismantling those explanations until only the uncomfortable truth remains. For some people, retirement is not rest. It is a slow form of disappearance. The story makes that disappearance feel tangible. It isn't only the pain in his spine or the cane in his hand. It's the way language shifts around him. The way even family begins speaking of him in past tense without realizing it. The way tabloids keep an obituary draft saved, ready to publish the moment they can justify it. The way his IMDb page seems to harden into finality, as if his last credit is a period, not a comma. When death hoaxes trend monthly, the internet is essentially practicing the ritual of losing him, rehearsing grief while he is still here to witness it. That's why the transcript's central theme isn't age. It's purpose. It draws a sharp distinction between the inevitable decline of the body and the preventable decline of the spirit. Michael Caine's body, by this account, is failing in ways that cannot be negotiated away forever. The condition is degenerative. The pain is constant. Each step requires calculation. But the transcript argues that the deeper threat is psychological, becoming a living archive. A museum piece who can still think, still feel, still hunger for meaning, yet has no stage left to justify that hunger. When Vin Diesel calls, the transcript presents it as the rare moment that interrupts the suffocating quiet. Not because the offer is prestigious, but because the offer is alive. It demands decisions. It creates a future date on the calendar. It turns tomorrow into something other than a repetition of the same silent day. And crucially, the transcript suggests Diesel does not approach Caine as a trophy. He approaches him as a necessity. I need you. That word matters because need is what retirees lose first. The industry admires you, celebrates you, and then quietly stops needing you. For a man who has spent his entire life being needed by sets, scripts, crews, directors, and audiences, that absence is not neutral. It is corrosive. The transcript anticipates the backlash, and it doesn't fully argue with it. Critics will say this project is beneath him, that it risks tarnishing a legacy, that at 92, he should stay home, enjoy comfort, accept the sunset. And in a purely rational framework, they might be right. But the transcript's point is that rationality is not the only force that governs a human life, especially at the end of it. There's also fear. Not the fear of dying, but the fear of dying before death. The fear of waking up and realizing your life has become an afterword while you are still breathing. This is where the transcript becomes most exacting about what the comeback requires. It refuses to romanticize the process. The preparation is described like a military operation disguised as filmmaking. There are medication schedules that define the morning, not vanity or routine. There are windows of mobility, brief periods when pain relief peaks and movement becomes possible, treated like tactical opportunities rather than comfort. There is specialized physical therapy designed not to reverse age, but to make performance survivable. The goal is not youth. The goal is function. Even the set itself is redesigned around truth. Chairs are built to look like ordinary props, but function as disguised support systems. Body doubles are used for everything except what must be him. The close-ups, the dialogue, the presence. A medical team is required on set, not as a precaution, but as infrastructure. Insurance demands signatures, examinations, and endless paperwork because the risk isn't theoretical. It's a daily reality. The transcript's most revealing line in this section is not about the film at all. It's the philosophy that emerges from the logistics. We're not fighting age. We're negotiating with it. Negotiation implies terms. It implies concessions. It implies humility. And that humility is what the transcript uses to protect Caine from the charge of delusion. He is not pretending he can do what he did at 40. He is admitting he cannot. He is simply refusing to accept that cannot means therefore you must stop entirely. In that sense, the transcript suggests the comeback is an act of honesty, not denial. The bravest version of aging is not insisting you're still young. It's refusing to let age dictate your spirit while you make practical adjustments to your body's limits. That is why Caine's interviews, as referenced here, matter. He is open about pain, about challenge, about the possibility this could be the thing that finishes him. That admission removes the gloss and replaces it with something rarer, dignity. And still, the transcript insists that the true engine is not pride. It is identity. Michael Caine has always been the man who kept moving. The working-class boy who refused the limitations of birth. The survivor who refused to be defined by the Blitz. The actor who refused to quit when elders told him the odds were too steep. The man who nearly drowned in vodka and then chose love over slow death. The son who learned that his mother's greatest act of love was endurance carried in silence. Every chapter in the transcript leads to the same conclusion. Stopping is not his nature. Motion is. That motion, however, is no longer effortless. And the transcript does not hide the heartbreak of that. When you imagine him rehearsing lines with magnified glasses, gripping a walking cane, holding someone's arm not for the scene, but for support, you are forced to see the cost. Yet the transcript's instruction is clear: do not pity him, because pity assumes he is being dragged. The transcript frames him as choosing. Choosing what exactly? Choosing to remain present tense. Choosing to keep a reason for his heart to beat that is bigger than mere survival. Choosing to answer the phone when opportunity calls, not because it flatters him, but because it restores him. It gives him a structure again. Days with meaning, scenes with purpose, a schedule that says, you are still here, and you still matter. The transcript also introduces a quiet, unsettling inversion. The world thinks retirement is the safe option, but for Michael Caine, retirement is the dangerous option. It creates emptiness, and emptiness is what almost killed him before. Shakira, described as the one who saved him from that earlier collapse, becomes the witness to this truth again. Her job is not simply to keep him from pain. Her job is to keep him from the absence of purpose that pain can produce. So when the film finally arrives, whatever form it takes, whatever critics say about its worthiness, the transcript suggests we are not merely watching an old man chase relevance. We are watching someone demonstrate a final principle. Passion does not recognize retirement. Purpose does not come with an expiration date. And the only tragedy worse than the ending is giving up while there is still something left to give. In the transcript's closing logic for this section, the comeback is not about reclaiming youth. It's about reclaiming life. A lion in winter is not trying to become a cub again. He is simply refusing to lie down while he still has breath to roar. The transcript reaches its final emotional argument by stripping away everything audiences usually use to explain a late-life comeback. Money? The transcript dismisses it. Glory? 2 Oscars, major honors, and cultural immortality have already done that work. Even the idea of proving he can still do it is treated as uncertain because the transcript makes a point of his honesty. He isn't sure he can. What remains once those motives are peeled away is something both simpler and harder to face: purpose and the fear of losing it. In the transcript's world, the real death isn't the moment the heart stops. It's the moment a person becomes past tense while still breathing. You can feel that dread in the details. Tabloids saving obituaries in advance. Death hoaxes trending so often they become routine. The subtle shift in how loved ones speak, as if the mind starts practicing the farewell before the body has even left. For someone like Michael Caine, who has lived by action and production, that rehearsal is unbearable. It's not the thought of dying that tortures him. It's the thought of being archived. That word, archived, captures the modern cruelty of fame. The world celebrates you and preserves you, but preservation can be another form of removal. It turns you into a museum object, admired, referenced, and safely separated from the living present. The transcript presents Caine as resisting that separation, not out of vanity, but out of a basic human refusal to disappear before he is truly gone. That's why the story returns again to the philosophy he states with a dark smile. Growing old gives you no alternative. The only alternative is death, so you might as well be cheerful. In the transcript, that isn't motivational fluff. It's a coping mechanism sharpened into doctrine. If the options are decline or ending, then decline becomes something you negotiate with rather than something you surrender to. The preparation for the film is described as that negotiation in practice. Nothing about it is glamorous. Every morning starts earlier, not for celebrity indulgence, but for a carefully timed regimen of medication that makes movement possible. There are brief windows when the pain relief peaks and the inflammation subsides, moments when his body can be coaxed into cooperation. Those windows are treated like precious currency. The physical therapist he works with isn't chasing youth. She's engineering function. Her goal is not to make him strong, but to make him look stable enough for the camera without crossing the line where the work becomes dangerous. The transcript emphasizes the technical craft of aging performance. How to position the body so the camera doesn't catch tremors, how to lean without looking like leaning, how to preserve dignity in small movements that the audience reads as presence. Even the set is engineered for him. Chairs disguised as props, support systems hidden inside the environment so he can get through a scene without collapsing. A medical team becomes part of the daily apparatus. Insurance becomes its own bureaucracy. The film isn't simply shot, it's managed like an operation. And still, the transcript insists that when the camera rolls, something sacred happens. Not sacred because it's cinematic, but sacred because it restores the thing that retirement threatened to erase. His sense of being alive in the present tense. For a performer, being alive is not simply breathing. It's doing, it's creating, it's being needed by a set, a story, a crew. The transcript suggests that this need is not narcissism, it is structure. It is the architecture that has held his life together since he was a teenager. This is why the story keeps returning to the idea that the greatest role he is playing now might be himself. Because himself is no longer the effortless gentleman of old films. Himself is a man negotiating with pain, adjusting posture, counting steps, reading scripts with magnified glasses. But himself is also the same working-class boy who refused to accept limitation as destiny, the same actor who refused to quit when older men told him to give up, the same husband who credits one woman with saving his life, the same son who learned that love can mean carrying grief in silence and continuing anyway. The transcript's emotional climax is not a triumphant speech. It is an image, an old man on set, moving slower, speaking softer, holding an arm not for the scene but for support, yet still insisting on the right to be here. The audience may see fragility, but the transcript asks us to see something else. Dignity that comes from honesty, and courage that comes from refusing to act old in the way the world expects. In the end, the transcript argues that legacy is not something you protect by stopping. Legacy is something you prove by showing up one more time, even when logic calls it madness. Because Michael Caine, as portrayed here, has never been governed by logic alone. He has been governed by the need to keep moving, by the belief that as long as there is breath left, there is still a reason to use it. The transcript ends the way a good farewell story should end, not with certainty, but with defiance. Because Michael Caine's final lesson here isn't about acting technique, awards, or even fame. It's about what happens when the world insists you should be finished, and something inside you refuses to agree. At 92, the facts are brutal. His spine is failing. The cane is no longer symbolic. Pain is no longer occasional. The medical reality is not something he can outwork, charm, or ignore. And yet the transcript keeps returning to the same uncomfortable idea. The real danger is not that his body will stop. The real danger is that he will stop having a reason to keep going before his body actually quits. That's why the death hoaxes matter so much in this story. They aren't just internet nonsense. They are the world practicing a goodbye, turning a living man into an event, a headline, a memory. They are proof of how quickly culture turns legends into museums. And Michael Caine's refusal, as portrayed here, is not to be preserved. It is to remain alive in the only way he has ever understood it. By working, creating, showing up. The transcript argues that this is not arrogance. It's identity. He has lived his entire life in motion, through war, poverty, rejection, success, addiction, love, loss, and now old age. Motion is the thread connecting every chapter. Even his mother's secret, the one that shaped him, was built on motion. 50 years of weekly journeys, 50 years of showing up for a child the world told her to forget. In that revelation, Michael learned that endurance can be love, and that continuing can be a form of loyalty. And then there is Shakira, the second pillar of the story. If his mother taught him survival, Shakira taught him life. How to choose clarity over self-destruction, how to want tomorrow, how to build purpose out of quiet rituals when silence threatens to swallow you. When she calls him a lion in winter, it isn't sentimental. It's strategy. It's the reminder that even when the body weakens, the spirit can still choose to stand. So when the transcript tells us he may be 93 when the film releases, the number isn't there just for shock value. It's there to sharpen the question. What is a life supposed to look like at the edge of its final chapters? Should it be tidy, safe, and quiet? Or can it be brave, imperfect, and active, even if that activity is slower, softer, and supported? The transcript anticipates the critics who will say he should have stayed retired, that the project isn't worthy, that he risks tarnishing his legacy. And maybe they're right. But the story insists that being right has never been Michael Caine's governing principle. His principle has been presence, refusing to become past tense while he is still breathing, refusing to let time write his final scene for him. In the final image, we are asked not to feel sorry for him, but to learn from him. Life isn't measured by how many years you collect, but by what you do with the ones you have left. If the only alternative to growing old is death, then you might as well be cheerful, and if you still can, answer the phone one more time.